Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about Commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, he's a shill for the new legend Shilgengar. It's Matt Morgan.
Joey, I recently learned what a bee's favorite ingredient is to bake with.
Honey, right?
No, it's flowers.
Okay. You got me good. I accept that. Yeah.
So that one was sent to me actually by a CardSphere user. Joey, you like CardSphere.
Yes.
One of the cool things about CardSphere is like whenever I get cards half the time, like people are sending me dad jokes in those packages and envelopes as well. So just a nice little perk to all those who haven't checked out CardSphere yet. You get dad jokes too, at least if you're me.
That's really, really terrific. And I love that we have a new source of really horrible pun-based humor, Matt. That's terrific.
I'm crowdsourcing these days, and it's going to be great.
Fantastic. Up next, when I mentioned Shilgengar, he thought I was talking about shilling for the Pokemon named Gengar. It's Dana Roach.
I was going to make a time travel joke here, but you guys didn't like it.
Oh, well, that's a shame, Dana.
It took me a second.
It was a joke grenade. I had to toss it at Matt and just took a second before it detonated.
I mean, it's still... It went off in the past. It just took me till the future to finally see it.
I love that I got a joke faster than Matt did, because usually he's the one telling jokes that go over my head. So this is a new development for me.
That is true.
This is great. All right. Hey, Dana, what are we talking about in this week's episode?
We're going to be talking about our favorite commons and uncommons from Modern Horizons 3.
Yeah. Modern Horizons 3 stuff. This set is really, really like dominating everyone's attention. And especially because a lot of the rares are really splashy. But there are a lot of commons and uncommons that to us are kind of striking our fancy even more. And will probably end up being even bigger role players on a lot of our EDH decks. So we want to give those cards their due, because there are some really important pieces from that set that are worth a lot of the attention that, they shouldn't get overlooked. So we'll get into that, but we've got some shout outs before we get to the main topic.
We are excited to be members of Team Ultimate Guard. The fact that we use their products already made this partnership a natural fit, and we've got nothing but great things to say about them. Joey used to have problems confusing his decks. What? Like, is this my Orzhov graveyard deck? Is this my Dimir graveyard deck? Is it my Golgari graveyard deck? Is this my other Golgari graveyard deck? Or my third Golgari graveyard deck? Well, with 16 different colors of katana sleeves, you can put each of your graveyard decks in different colored sleeves and a different color Boulder deck box. It's a top-notch product, and the prices are more than reasonable, and we can't recommend them enough.
Dana, why must, whenever you talk about cool products that we just like Ultimate Guard, you also have to point out that I have a problem? Like, why you got to do that to me, man? Like,
don't worry, Joey. I also have been mixing and matching my Boulder deck boxes, so I'm also doing that. So you may have a problem, but I have that same problem.
Thank you, Dana. I do appreciate Ultimate Guard for being able to do a lot of cool things, apparently also helping me with my graveyard issues.
Yeah, well, if you would like to support the show, you can do so by liking and subscribing to this video on YouTube, subscribing to your local podcast apps, just great free ways to support us, which means the world to us. It just helps more than you will ever know. But if you would like to go to patreon.com/EDHRECast, you can support us and get something back for yourself as a way of saying thank you for the support. Whether you want to join the Discord communities, you want to see all these episodes a day early, there's all of that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including the coveted weekly patron shoutout. So this week, I want to say a very, very special thank you to Brian McKean, who was very keen on going to patreon.com/EDHRECast and supporting us over there. So thank you, Brian, for all of your support. It means the world to us, and thank you so much.
Man, every week with these shoutouts, I can never tell whether Matt will make a silly joke based off of the last name or the first name. I thought it might be like a Brian Stoutarm joke, and but then you could make a Keen joke as well. So, Matt, you keep me on my toes, but I'm sure our listeners really appreciate the sillinesses.
I mean, I hope so. Well, Brian is a power name. That's my middle name. I mean, Brian Kibler, Brian David Marshall. It's a good name for Magic players.
It is too. Prof's name is Brian as well.
There we go.
Actually, yeah, Brian, you're in really great company, and thank you so much for being a patron. As Matt said, it means the world. It allows us to make the show in the first place. So seriously, thank you. Okay, with that, guys, I think we're going to move now into our topic here. We're talking about commons and uncommons from the new Modern Horizons 3 set. And Modern Horizons sets always have these amazing sparkly rares and mythics that are taking up a whole bunch of attention. But we've also got some commons and uncommons from the set that are real bread and butter cards that at least to me, some of them are kind of upstaging some of the rares. And so we want to talk about those because they should not get overlooked. Dana, I know that this was also a subject that you were pretty keen on, Brian McKean on even. Where do you think we should start with this topic, do you think?
I want to start with the MDFC cards, which are the spell on front half, land in the back half cards, kind of revisiting a mechanic that was first revealed in the third Zendikar set. The reason I want to talk about these is there were so many of them that I was potentially putting into decks. And I know these have a reputation as being a card type that gets heavily used. I don't know if they necessarily have deserved that in the past. I think people might overvalue some of their utility as modular cards. And the reason I say that, do you guys know Ondu Inversion?
Yeah, that's the 8-mana sorcery on one side that destroys, I think it's all non-land permanents. But then, of course, it's just a enters tapped land on the other half.
Yeah. So, like, that's a fine card. But, for my personal evaluation looking at it, it's a pretty narrow set of circumstances where I want to spend 8 mana and destroy everything but lands.
Yeah. It's an expensive spell. Yeah.
You have to be behind. You have to have mana. Like, for the most part, I'm playing that as a tapped land. And I don't think it's worth playing a tapped land just to, on occasion, be in a terrible situation and need to have that board wipe. So how many times are you paying a tax for a spell that's only going to be useful in certain situations? And if it's useful for you in a bunch of situations, then you need to fix the fact that you're that far behind in all of your games versus like just wiping the board.
Dang. Spill. I love that.
But I think a lot of those old MDFCs feel a little bit like that. That was the balance for this first group of MDFCs. There was a lot of Ondu inversions in there where like they're only good in a certain narrow situation. Compare that to something like the Balagad Recovery.
Well, I mean, Balagad Recovery, that's the regrowth on one side, but that's also kind of the best one of all the MDFCs so far.
Right.
Well, absolutely. And the reason it's the best one is because there's almost no situation where that's not playable on either half. You're either going to play it as a land or you've got something in your graveyard you want to retrieve. The utility on that is always there. You always have a choice and are given the chance to make the best of those two choices. And I think the original cycle of these lands didn't necessarily have really, really strong backs that like were good in every situation.
Sure.
That's what I think we're seeing with a lot of these ones in Modern Horizons 3. A lot of these new ones are the Balagad Recovery types where the card is almost always playable on either side. There's almost no point in the game where they're just not useful for either mode. And I think that makes them way more powerful than the original cycle ones we got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 8 mana, like you said, is just like, oh, there's no way I'm paying that for the Ondu. And the numbers kind of reflect that. Like, it's a popular card showing up in 2% of decks that can play it. But Balagad Recovery showing up in 10% of decks that can play it. That's showing up in 186,000 decks because that thing's so good. And yeah, it comes down to I'm always happy for either of these effects. This is a cost that I am happy to pay. And Dana, I'm with you. Some of these new MDFCs, these new Muddle Double Face cards are like, I'm good with either one of these sides. I'm kind of excited for either of them a lot more than a lot of past versions of these effects we've seen.
Yeah, I think because one of the issues that Dana pointed out is like they're kind of either super narrow or they're just overly costly. Like you're overpaying for a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
They probably played the MDFCs very, very safe the first time around. Really, Balagad Recovery is the only one I really think I've put into any decks. But this round, it's a pretty crowded field as far as like these are going to do a lot of work as just getting into a lot of decks, and they're very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a whole round of them that are just like removal spells on their spell half. Like Sink into Stupor is the blue one that can bounce either a spell or a non-land permanent. You've got Fell the Profane, the black one, which is 4 mana to destroy a creature or planeswalker. Not gonna lie, that's not a rate that I'm crazy about. But the other component to a lot of these is that they don't always have to enter tapped. You can pay 3 life on the other half to make them come in untapped, a lot like the Seagate Restorations, the mythic versions of these things that we saw. So like that's another piece of flexibility here. The costs are not quite the 8 mana sky high version, and the cost on the back half, there's a little bit of like you can bolt yourself if you don't want to lose the tempo. So those components make these very interesting and exciting and a lot more compelling to me.
Yeah, these are, again, like I said, the options on these are almost always playable in these situations. And I feel like that was not the case the first time through. And that's why when I started doing like rough drafts of what I wanted to add for Modern Horizons 3, I found myself looking at like, man, Sink into Stupor, I could potentially put that into almost every blue deck. Fel the Profane, I could potentially put that in almost in every black deck. And I never really felt that way about that first cycle of MDFCs. I was never had like off the top of my head, like, oh, onto inversion, almost every white deck might want that. That was never even something I was like roughly considering. And there's like 10 different MDFCs here that I was like, oh yeah, that's probably going to go in a deck.
I mean, Witch Enchanter, a land or a 4-mana creature that blows up an artifact or enchantment when it enters. I'm hard-pressed to think of a reason to not play this in, like, any Blink deck. And the creature types aren't irrelevant either. I mean, it's a human and a warlock, so it can go into those types of decks. It could go into outlaw decks, a land when you need it, or if you're blinking stuff, it's repeatable removal. That's really cool. That's awesome. I'm going to put the red Sundering Eruption in places too. It removes a land, but that's not even the most interesting line of text on that card to me. It's either a land or, late game if you have it, it makes blocks super hard for someone else because it says that creatures without flying can't block this turn, which could actually be the thing that pushes you to a lethal attack step. The cost of running a card like that is so low, but the potential payoff there is great. And I look forward to like playing these cards and then potentially using a bounce land to get them right back to hand to surprise my opponents with them.
Well, and I think we haven't gotten to the best part, at least in my mind, for all these is we have 2-color MDFCs now.
Yeah.
We have multicolor. So like not only because the ones that we've gotten in the past, they were always going to be tapping for just one color. Yes, the bolt lands in monocolor are fine. I don't love them as much on the land side, but having 2-color MDFCs now, that's huge. That's where I think these are really going to get a chance to shine. The 10 dual-colored MDFCs, these things are going to be great.
Matt, I am with you. Like a utility land that always comes in tapped but only gives you one color. That's a hard sell.
It's rough.
That's becoming a harder and harder sell for me. Like Balagad Recovery, that's something I'm game for. Malakir Rebirth was also very, very playable from the first one, but again, those were kind of cheap. And that was like a cost I'm certainly willing to pay. But like an enters tapped dual land, I'm used to that with a whole lot of different things. And having the option for it to be on the other half, I don't know, for example, Revitalizing Repast, which is the Golgari one. Dana, I know you're a fan of it too.
Yeah, instant speed, put a +1 counter on a creature and it gets indestructible to end a turn. That's the kind of thing where there's almost no point in the game where that's not useful.
Yeah, just like, okay, this could be a land if I need it early, and it could also save like my commander from a potential board wipe later on. Maybe not everything, but like that's a situation that I feel pretty comfortable with. And Matt, to your point, the fact that this can give me 2 of the different colors I might need, that matters. That matters a lot. And again, these are just like baseline stuff. But I think that's the important note to hit, right? Is that like these are kind of the small players that are easy to overlook. They're not the enormous rares like the Warren Soul Traders, which of course are dazzling. But these are going to be the role players that actually make the deck tick. And like with so many new pieces, they're going to make the deck tick just a little bit better. And all of those little things will add up a lot.
Well, and then one thing to keep in mind too is all of these cards are competing in a space that like you would want anyways. Like Revitalizing Repast has like Tamio's Safekeeping, where it's kind of doing similar things, single target, save a creature. But then you also have like the Selesnya one, Strength of the Harvest, where it's doing a really, really good all that glitters impersonation, where it's 2 and a hybrid Selesnya. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature and or enchantment that you control. So it's making things pretty buff out there and doing things in a space. It's not just an over-costed version. It's doing that where it's a little more flexible because you can play it as a land or a spell. And you're paying like a mana or 2 more instead of like 5 mana too much.
Like, I know this is kind of uncharacteristic for me, but I'm actually a really big fan of the Naya ones, these Naya dual land ones especially. Like, first of all, Stomp is one of the best names for a card I've seen in a while. That's the Gruul one, a sorcery that is it's a removal spell. A creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. All right, cool. Like, yeah, just could be a removal spell. That seems really, really great. And then the Boros one also, Legion Leadership, can instant speed double one of your creature's power and give it first strike. But like doubling a creature's power, that's for 2 mana. That's a rate that I'll take. I've played 2 mana combat tricks that give double strike. This is effectively pretty similar, and it also pairs well with other things that give double strike. Like these are exciting to me. Like they might make a Naya player out of me yet. These are really, really effective. I'd be very happy to have these in my they're in my mana base. But here's the thing. We all know how good bounce lands are with these modal double-faced lands.
Yeah.
Like, I already play a whole lot of bounce lands, and now I'm even more excited to play the number of bounce lands that I do, because then I could be able to get back spells like these. Like, if you weren't already playing bounce lands, I really think that this new influx of these different spells that you can get back, there's a density of them now that could show up in your decks that really makes bounce lands worth even more consideration than they probably already were before. To get back, like that enchantment that Matt could suddenly slap down onto one of his creatures and have a surprise huge attacker.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I also think what's interesting about these too is there's a cap on how many of these you can run in your deck, and we're definitely at that cap. I think like there's just so many good utility lands, so many MDFCs, but I think in a lot of ways that makes them kind of safe. It's not a situation where you are just adding these to your decks and removing basics. Probably. Most decks are already like so filled with good utility lands that you're taking out good utility lands to make room for these good utility lands. We've hit this kind of point where the saturation is such that it's kind of safe to print more of these whenever they want to. Even if they're really strong, you're taking out something really strong too. And there's an equilibrium there that I kind of like.
Yeah, you will get to a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're playing Goblin Charbelcher deck, which like I can't imagine the last time I saw this one in Legacy. But yeah, if you don't want any lands in your deck, you can certainly do that. I don't know how effective that's going to be, but I mean,
sounds exciting.
Yeah, you are going to get to a point where you really can't fit any more of these in there because you still need just regular lands. Otherwise, you're playing perpetually from too far behind, I think, to really have these be to make it mesh into an effective deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not playing like 8 or 10 of each of these in my decks, but I am certainly going up to. I'll probably land around like 4 if I had to guess. Like I checked my decks before recording, and on average, I usually play 1 or most often 2 MDFC lands per deck. I almost never play 0 of the MDFCs, just from the previous batch of them that we had before. And now I think with these new options, I may end up going now to probably 4. I don't know about minimum, but I think is kind of my guess. I think that's probably where I'll end up landing.
And even the overcosted ones, I think, are pretty interesting here. Suppression Ray is 3 and double Azoria, so that's 5 mana to tap all creatures a player controls, and it's at sorcery speed. Yes, you can pay some energy to put stun counters on them, but like unless you're playing an energy deck, that's probably not something you're doing. But even if you're way ahead, the point in the game when you wouldn't want to cast onto Inversion or something, there's very few points in the game, even with this overcosted spell, where it's not worth tapping all of an opponent's creatures down to swing through an Alpha Strike. Like that one is kind of the bad version of these MDFCs, and that one still has a ton of utility, let alone the ones that are really, really good.
I think that's the thing that's hitting for me is that, like, with the previous batch of them, to me there were very few of the spells that I was like definitely excited to cast. They felt like hyper situational maybe, or a lot of mana.
Yeah.
So there weren't too many that I was like definitely actively happy to cast, and I felt like if I was playing one of these sides, I might be a little bit sad about it. So I haven't played too many of the MDFCs. I've played some of the more famous ones, and sometimes just like 1 or 2 in a deck rather than filling a deck with them. Whereas now I feel like we have a lot more that are a lot more compelling. As folks who play a lot of limited had found, I think the math they balance it out to like, every 2 modal double face cards that you play with the land on the back half, you can kind of count that as 1 land. That was a metric that I was not quite as certain about when the first batch came out, because I was like, I don't know that I'm playing too many of them, and I'm a little bit wary about telling people to not run enough lands. Whereas that formula feels a little bit more comfortable for me, because like I do see myself playing decks that have 4 of these now. I do see that happening for me. And at that point, counting them exclusively as one thing or the other would be kind of overbalancing. So I'm a lot happier with that formula. And again, particularly because not all of them have to enter tapped. Like That is really big for me, like not having to sacrifice that tempo. Although, Matt, it didn't sound like you were as great a fan of bolting yourself.
Yeah, the single color MDFCs in this one, I would rather just anticipate them always being tapped and evaluate them off that, because paying 3 life for a monocolor land to come in untapped, that is a pretty steep price. Like we joke about how new players, they can't wrap their head around shock lands, and why would I pay 2 life to have this come into play untapped? Whatever. It 3 life is obviously 1 more, but just having that for a monocolor land, that's where I'm like, I don't really imagine how often I'm going to want to pay this for a monocolor land. That's where I'm like, I don't know. I think that the spell sides are way more powerful than the last batch of MDFCs. So it's really hard to gauge because I don't know. I wasn't playing any of the mythic MDFCs from Zendikar Rising to begin with. And so it's really hard for me to evaluate these two because I wasn't playing the first round.
Sure.
Because I was never going to play those as a land. And the spells, again, were a little overcost for what they were.
Yeah, Matt, that's interesting. The mythic ones, we've seen this pattern before. The mythic ones, a lot of them are pretty popular. Seagate Restoration has shown up in 5% of decks that can play it, over 100,000 decks. I think the least popular one was, it's a Maria's Call, which is only showing up in like 2% of decks that can play it. These are ones that I've got in a few decks. I actually have a Yannette deck where I don't want to flip a land off the top of the Yannette's ability. I like flipping a spell off the top of the Yannette's ability. So having a bigger density of those is great. I'm not in love with every single one of them, like you said, but I do appreciate that option a whole lot. But you know me, I'm also the kind of person who's like willing to pay life for a whole lot of stuff. Dan and I have a Sylvan Library enjoyment very much in common for this kind of thing. So we're used to paying life, so maybe we're biased. But yeah, they strike me as very, very important, especially some of the creature ones. The Boggart that on one half is a goblin that exiles a graveyard, on the other half is just a land. As much as I regret to say it, that's a really dang good card. I don't think it's on Bojuka Bog levels, but that's a really dang good card. Yeah. I'm probably not going to put it into a deck like my party deck. That would be an off-type creature. I probably won't put it there, but I'm putting it in a lot of my black decks because this could be a creature I just sacrifice, or it could be a land. It could hose someone else's graveyard. Like, that's good utility. The situationalness of that one actually feels really, really excellent. So we've gotten even more that still feel compelling, like a lot of those other ones that are popular also felt compelling to players.
Well, before we stop talking lands here, there's one more uncommon one I'd like to mention briefly, and that's Urza's Cave. Its land type is Urza's Cave. It comes in untapped, taps for colorless mana, but you can spend 3 and sacrifice it and search your library for a land card, not a basic land card, a land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. Obviously, people that are running the Gaia's Cradles of the world in the Cabal Coffers and the Serra Sanctum, it's really good to have a way to go tutor that up in any color. But there's a lot of situations where I'm playing a monocolor deck with Nykthos. It gives me one more way to go grab Nykthos every single time. There's just a lot of decks. If you care about having a sack outlet, it's one more way to go grab your high market. There's just a lot of decks that want the ability to go get a specific land, and if you don't need to get that land because you already have it, then it still comes into play untapped and taps for mana, and there's just very little downside to it.
Yeah, putting this in every single deck I think is a stretch, but it's going to be in a lot of decks because there are so many decks out there that again, we have a lot of powerful utility lands, and you're going to want to find them more often. I really think just a lot of these just general kind of utility lands that we're getting at common and uncommon, even like the bountiful landscape and that type of really, they're better panoramas when you think about it, which they all have cycling for 3 colors. That land cycle is very, very good. It taps for colorless mana. Especially now with Modern Horizons, I need a lot of colorless producing lands. But then if I don't need that colorless mana anymore, I can get rid of it, hit a landfall trigger if I need, for example, grab a basic land, and then just get all my colors fixed in the early game too. So there's a lot of just good utility lands in this set too that aren't even MDFCs.
Yeah. And you know what? Actually, I think another important thing to highlight about that Urza's Cave is that that's not restricted to sorcery speed, so you can instant that's kind of a crop rotation. You can instant speed, go find a Bojuka Bog and get rid of my graveyard at a time that I did not think you'd be able to do that. You can instant speed, go and find your Glacial Chasm, and then you can't be hurt. If you've seen the stuff that crop rotation can do, that land is also capable of it, and that's very good. That's scary good.
Yeah, Matt said it doesn't go in every deck, but man, it goes in a lot of decks.
It goes in a lot of decks.
Dana, you said earlier that you're how many basics am I going to be able to run? I'm running into that now too, actually. And so that is, I think, the real issue with this set is I really have to come to grips with how many basics am I still going to be able to continue to play. And if I'm running too few basics, well, that would be a stat that I think we would all have to challenge now, wouldn't it? Matt, you loved that segue and you know it. Come on.
That was a pretty good one. I liked it.
It was a C+.
Okay, you know what? I'll take it. I'll take
it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we've only talked about the land-y stuff from Modern Horizons so far, but there are a lot of other cards we want to talk about too. First, though, we're going to challenge some of the data on EDHREC. We'll be right back with that.
My challenge this week is from listener My Life with John C., and he's challenging a card in the Celestial Toymaker, which was a card from the Doctor Who Secret Lair. The Celestial Toymaker says whenever it attacks, look at the top 3 cards of your library, and you can exile any number of them in a face-down pile, and the rest in a face-up pile, and the defending player chooses one of those piles, and you put that card into your hand, so kind of a fact or fiction thing. And at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses 2 life for each spell or ability that caused 1 or more players to guess or to group cards or permanents into a pile this turn. And My Life with John C. is challenging the card Sphinx Ambassador in Celestial Toymaker decks. This card lets you search your opponent's library when it deals damage to a player, and you can grab a card and then make that player choose a card name. And if it's a creature card that they choose incorrectly, you can put it into play under your control. However, this is kind of a nombo in conjunction with Toymaker because your opponents are choosing a card name. They're not guessing, and the Toymaker wants you to guess. So while you are going to get a thing for free potentially, it's not actually working with the Toymaker in the way the Toymaker wants it to work. And the fact that it's in 42% of Toymaker decks makes me feel like a whole lot of people are running this and not entirely understanding that interaction. So if you're not getting that bonus interaction, that means you're paying just a ton of mana for a large flyer that might get you something, but it seems like that's not probably a good inclusion in a deck where you're not taking added advantage of that. So that's a pretty good call, John. Thanks for suggesting that to us.
Oh, we love a non-bow challenge the stats. And that's a really good, the word guess doesn't appear anywhere on Sphinx Ambassador.
Yeah.
So that's a really fantastic catch. I love that.
Super easy one to miss for sure.
Yeah. I'll move to my challenge to stats here now. And this actually comes to us from our friend of the show, Lenny Woolley. He messaged me to let me know about a card that he wanted to challenge for the Aura Commander Lightpaws Emperor's Voice. Lightpaws, mono white, really heavy into the Aura stuff for this commander, but there were a couple of instances that caught Lenny's eye, and he was just like, hey, folks should probably take a look at these numbers. What do you think? And Lenny, I think it's great. Let's get to some of these instances that you're critiquing for good reason. The card Karametra's Blessing shows up in 47% of the 8,200 Lightpaws decks. Karametra's Blessing is a 1-mana white instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's an enchanted creature or enchantment creature, it also gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So if Lightpaws is enchanted, which is very, very likely in this deck that is full of so many auras, then you'll be able to get a small buff, but more importantly, the hexproof and the indestructible. So that's a great catch. But Lenny also points out that the card Blacksmith's Skill, another 1-mana white instant that gives target permanent hexproof and indestructible until end of turn and gives it +2 if it's an artifact creature, that one's only showing up in 36% of Lightpaws decks, which is a little bit curious because the +2/+2 is not the important part of either of those cards. The hexproof and indestructible is the important part of that card. Like, you are trying to protect something. And to that end, Blacksmith's Skill is actually kind of superior to the Karametra's Blessing, because there could be a moment where your commander or the thing you're trying to protect isn't enchanted. It doesn't have an enchantment on it, and therefore it wouldn't get the hexproof and indestructible from the Karametra's Blessing. And Blacksmith's Skill definitely gives those abilities, but also Blacksmith's Skill can get any target permanent, not just target creature. So Lenny, thank you so much for pointing this out. You're right, people do need to know. Karametra's Blessing should probably be played under Blacksmith's Skill, or worded another way, Blacksmith's Skill should be more popular than the Blessing, because the versatility is there, and being able to save any target permanent feels really, really important to me too. So thank you so much for that suggestion, Lenny.
Well, I'll wrap us up then real quick with my challenge this week. And I keep looking at this card and thinking, there's got to be a home for this. There's got to be somewhere to play this. And the card is Treacherous Greed. It's a black and a white for an instance that says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature that dealt damage this turn. And then you draw 3 cards. Each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Now, it's pretty specific. You do need creatures to go through and connect. And then you also have to be willing to sacrifice that creature, barring if it deals combat damage or if it survives combat after getting blocked or blocking itself. So that is a hard loop to jump through. I fully understand that. But luckily, I think there's a deck that is kind of playing this card a little bit already that it just needs to be played significantly more in, and that's McCready Lamplight Mare. It's one of my favorite characters from the Fallout universe. It's a black and a white for McCready Lamplight Mare, Human Advisor. It's a 1/3 and says, whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less attacks, it gains Skulk until end of turn, which makes it so that it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater attacks you, its control controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So you're doing a lot of draining already in the deck. But the important part is giving your creatures with power 2 or less skulk, making them pretty hard to block. And if you look at the typical McCready deck, there's so many. I can't emphasize this enough. There's a ton of token makers in this deck. A lot of cards like to make 1/1 tokens, 2/2 tokens, and this is just a perfect home for that. So say you get through with one of these 1/1 tokens that you're making from any given thing, a charismatic conqueror, for example. You have a free creature that you can then sacrifice to this spell and make sure that you're getting all sorts of bonuses for it. You're drawing cards, you're doing more of the drain theme that the McCready deck likes to fill in. I love this card. I think it should be showing up in way more than just 11% of the decks. It's a powerful card. It's a great draw effect. You're drawing 3 for 3, and you're also gaining 3 life. I know Dana doesn't like it because he wants to lose the 3 life, but I really like this. It's only getting played in just 2,400 decks total right now. And I know it seems like it came out like 6 years ago because it came out in Karlov Manor, but it's actually a fairly new card. There's lots of room to grow here too. So Treacherous Greed, if you have tokens that deal combat damage, you need to sacrifice them. This is a great card to play next to those.
Very fun, press your advantage kind of tempo there. And I like the Skulk shout out. Just this past weekend, I got the chance to play against one of our buddies' Golem Obsessed Stalker decks. That is a 1/1 with Skulk. And there was a point in the game when that came out very, very early. And every other player was like, oh, there's no way for me to block that, actually. Skulk's a little sneaky. It'll actually sneak up on you. So the Skulks and the tokens, that's a great combination to make sure that card can be set up for success. Matt, I like the challenge. Okay, you guys, getting back into our topic here. We just talked about some land stuff just for the first half, and that was just land stuff. There are a lot of other exciting commons and uncommons in this set too, though. Matt, let's pass the ball right back to you. Not MDFC related, what other cards that aren't rares or mythics are sticking out to you from MH3 that you better gonna wind up in a bunch of your decks?
I mean, how much time do you have is a better question, I think, because there's so much. There's so much to go on. Like, do you want meme fun because you have Colossal Dread Mask, which is just turns every creature into a Colossal Dread Maw, or do you want like actually good cards that I do want to play? Like, I think we need to lead off with a card that's already been banned, maybe not from Commander, but Cranial Ram has already been banned from Pauper because it's so powerful. Like, this card right away, it's got a lot of vibes with Cranial Plating. It's a black and a red for an artifact equipment. It's got Living Weapon, which is pretty powerful. And then equipped creature gets +X+1, where X is the number of artifacts you control, and it only equips for 2 mana. Right off the bat, how many treasure tokens are you making in Rakdos? And the answer is 1 million.
Yeah, if you are playing any kind of a deck that can run this, that's making treasures, I mean, like every Brea deck, for example, there's just so much utility in this card. The fact that it comes into play already attached to a body in terms of Living Weapon, there's a lot of situations where if you then move it to something else, that germ dies, which gives you a creature dying trigger. It's just such a good card, and I'm genuinely shocked this is not a rare.
I mean, heck, speaking of all of the artifacts, though, a thing that's stuck out to me is the new Marionette Apprentice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Miss Mary Annette Apprentice, 2 mana, 1/2 human artificer that can also come with a servo token, and whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Like, it's kind of a joke of like, oh, will this card go into Aristocrats? Because they make so many cards that could be good in Aristocrats, and you can't play a 200 card deck. This is good in This is one of them. This is one of those cards that actually makes the cut. Good for treasure decks because it counts artifacts. We didn't need any more of those, but all right, cool. That's really, really intense. But yeah, this is going up there in the pantheon of other Zulaport artist types of effects that will make your board extremely deadly for a really cheap cost. This one's making it into at least 3 of my decks.
I mean, since we're talking about like things that do busted stuff when the bunch of artifacts in play, Arcbound Condor is a really, really good card. It's 2 and double black. It's a 0/0 flying artifact bird. It has modular 3, so it comes into play with 3+1 counters on it. But what's really important here is whenever another artifact enters battlefield under your control, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 till end of turn. In the right deck, that's just going to constantly be removing creatures. I mean, even if you're just playing an artifact creature deck, you're going to pretty regularly kill a handful of things. If you are playing a deck that like is making a ton of artifact tokens, whether it's treasures or clues or any of the variety of artifact tokens, you can really easily use this to basically clear all of your opponent's boards. Put it into play, make a bunch of treasures, kill a bunch of stuff, sacrifice this, move those counters over onto your Hangerback Walker, sacrifice that, make it like there's in artifact decks, this is just going to do a ton of really disgusting things.
Yeah, I think the rate probably looks not great. Like a 4-mana 3/3 flyer, people probably like it. It doesn't look exciting, but yeah, that ability that can kill off a lot of stuff if you wield it. And there's a lot of wielding it. Artifact tokens are constant in this format now.
Yeah. Well, I think the important parts that we need to point out here is it is any artifact. It's not non-token artifacts, which is that's a super important distinction that I think maybe it should have only counted non-token artifacts because this thing is just silly. Again, we're talking about treasures. I mean, we're 2 cards right off the bat that are dealing with treasure tokens. Man, there's some mistakes being made. I can't grok how silly this is going to get.
Well, to take us away from something treasure focused, Matt, what else has your attention?
Well, I mean, okay, so again, another popper card that I think actually is going to get played in a lot of formats. Glimpse the Impossible is super stinking good. We like to praise all of the impulse draw that Red has gotten over the years. Well, similar to Valakut Exploration, this is an impulse draw type of effect that you actually aren't just putting cards in exile and then they're going away. So Glimpse the Impossible is 2 and a red for a sorcery. Exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. At the beginning of your next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, put them into your graveyard, then create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. For each card put into the graveyard this way, these tokens have sacrifice this creature to add a colorless mana. So again, you have these impulse draw effects that are putting cards into exile, but then if you don't use them, they're not going away forever. They're going into the graveyard where you can then regrowth them later or do something out of the graveyard with them. I love Glimpse the Impossible. Even if you don't care about the Scions, being able to recycle the cards that you're impulse drawing, that's such a powerful effect.
I mean, Call the Scions is 2 and a green, and all it does is make 2 Eldrazi Scions and nothing else. And that's a card that actually sees a little bit of play in some decks. I'm running it in a deck, for example. This is the same mana value, although it's 2 and a red. If you do nothing else but make Scions with it, it's making 1 more than Call the Scions does. And that's, if you're just going to use it for that and you have the option to also use it for impulse draw. So it's, again, just a significantly better version of a card we already have that does see some play.
Both of you have decks that are built around Scion tokens. Like Danny, you sacrifice them to deal damage off of an agent to the Iron Throne. Matt, you pump up your Eldrazi tokens because you play Raga Draga. So there are so many cards in this set that are giving you new tokens to play around with, both of you.
Both of us have a number of cards on our maybe boards currently into the teens for our Eldrazi Scions and Spawns decks. This set was what I was hoping for. And it's weird, and Dana, maybe you feel similarly, it's weird having options for an Eldrazi Scion and Spawn deck because we've never had that before.
We were running some pretty dire stuff to have enough Spawn and Scion makers, and now we actually have choices.
Yeah. I'll also say though, there's so many of them that are going into those decks, and those can be a little bit niche. Here's one though that is it makes one of those tokens, and it's making a huge impression on me even without one of those tokens types of decks. Malevolent Rumble has, I think, captured my heart completely. 2 mana, green sorcery, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a permanent card from among them into your hand, the rest to your graveyard, and then you create one of those spawn tokens, 0/1, sacrifice to create a colorless. Put a permanent card. This is amongst that same category of those green spells, the Satyr Wayfinder-esque cards that will load up your graveyard, but also usually cantrip you one particular thing. Often they're restricted to just a creature or a land or something like this. This gets you any permanent card, and it makes you a mana dork. That's huge. The fact that this isn't a creature card itself in the way that you can manipulate the Satyr Wayfinders, that can matter, but you are still getting a creature, and that creature will put you ahead on mana for 1 turn. And the first time I cast this card, I managed to get my Phyrexian Altar into my hand off of the cards, and I was like, oh, okay, that's different. I'm not used to that. I'm excited now. I'm in love with this card.
Yeah, that's the first thing I thought when I saw it. I was like, Satyr Wayfinder sees a ton of play, and in a lot of situations, this is a better version of that. And it looks so innocent. Right. Unless you really think about all the ways this impacts decks, it doesn't seem like a super strong card unless you are someone who plays that style of card already. It's very innocuous.
Yeah, the Satyr Wayfinder shows up in near 40,000 decks. Don't let this one get overlooked. So let it join that pantheon. I really do think that it's up of a similar caliber.
One that I really liked, Fangs of Colonia, 1 and a green, put a +1 counter on target creature you control, and then double the number of counters on each creature that had a +1 counter. Put on it this way. It also has an overload option for 4 double green, so you can basically put a +1 counter on every creature you control and then double the counters on them. And that's fantastic too, but like, if this was just a 1 and a green sorcery that doubled the counters on a creature, there's a lot of decks where that's really, really good. The fact that you can also overload on it is even better, but I'd probably play it in at least 2 of my decks if it didn't even have the overload.
Yeah, with that card, Biogenic Upgrade, which is like definitely 6 mana and lets you double some stuff, that's not showing up in too many decks, only like 8,600 or so. Invigorating Surge, though, and that one's an instant, 3 mana, it's an instant. That one's showing up in, 28,000. This is kind of splitting both of those differences, but I'm not mad at either version. Like, I actually really like Biogenic Upgrade, but I get that it's expensive, so you can't always rely on it. But having the option of like, depending on if things are going for me, I'm very pleased. And that versatility, neither of those modes feel like things I'd be upset about casting. And at no point would it feel like a dead card either.
If you're playing a +1/+1 counters deck, this set is just absolutely full of just bangers for you. Evolution Witness, in the same vein as the reasons you like Fangs of Colonia, Evolution Witness is fantastic. It's 2 and a green for a 2/1 elf shaman mutant with adapt 2 that you can pay 1 and a green to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. But whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put onto Evolution Witness, return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So you're just going to crank through and get so many permanents back from your hand. It's a little limited, but if you're playing +1/+1 counters, you just want this card in all those decks.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've seen a lot of in this set is them taking a card that's already pretty commander playable and giving you what's basically a better version of it.
Yeah.
Eviscerator's Insight. 1 in a black as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or a creature. Costly Plunder's in a ton of decks. I have Costly Plunder in decks. This is Costly Plunder up until that point. And then it says flashback for 4 in a black. So it's an already really good, really playable card, but better. Like, so you Costly Plunder your thing, and then, when turn 8 rolls around, and if you are out of cards in hand and just need some gas or just need a sacrifice effect, it's sitting there in your graveyard to use it again. Or if you get milled accidentally or intentionally, it's sitting there in your graveyard to use it again. It's a better version of an already really good card.
I'll say I tend to be more of a Deadly Dispute kind of fan, but I'm not a fan either. Like, I get where you're coming from. Matt, I do have a question for you. How much do you like the card Brainstorm? One of your favorites, right?
For Commander, no. But if I'm trying to play Legacy and emphasis on trying, I do like Brainstorm. So depends, I think, is the answer.
Yes, no, you've challenged the stats on Brainstorm as being overplayed, on one of our very first episodes of the show ever. And it's shown up in 23% of decks that can play it. That's 23% of all blue decks. 458,000 decks are playing Brainstorm. And I'm not going to say that this other card, Brain Surge, is better than Brainstorm, but it is a cool evolution on Brainstorm that I am excited to see and to play. This is a 3 mana instant. Instead of Brainstorm, 1 mana, draw 3 cards, put 2 back. Brain Surge is 3 mana, draw 4, and put 2 back. And the things I'm excited to do with this card, that's cool. I have a Unette deck, like I said earlier. I like setting up the top of my deck, but it's also just instant speed. You are getting 2 cards. Or if you're doing things with a Teferi's Ageless Insight, you're drawing 8 cards and putting 2 back. You get so many pings off of stuff here, and you're netting the card advantage. I really appreciate the new Brain Surge. It's design that makes me very, very happy. And I don't see a reason to not play it in some of those decks that can really manipulate card draw triggers or top deck manipulation. It's a great new card to pal around with the original Brainstorm.
Yeah, the fact that you end up net 1 on cards versus Brainstorm, where you're still even, it's just a cantrip. That's a very, very important distinction. You're going to see 1 extra card and only putting those 2 back still. It's still instant speed too. That's the wild part too. I mean, we talk about how we have instant speed divinations now, but for the same cost, you're still drawing 2 cards, but you're seeing 4, and that's important. So this is a very, very powerful card. I like this worlds more than I do Brainstorm in Commander.
Sure.
It's wild. Like, Quick Study definitely power crept divination, and now we've already power crept Quick Study.
Yep, pretty much.
Right. Yeah.
That was fast.
Yeah. Hope you enjoyed the 3 months of being able to play it.
Another one I quite like here is Vexing Bauble. Colorless mana for an artifact. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. And you can then, of course, spend 1 and tap it to sacrifice it and draw a card. We've talked in the past about like how there's some things we don't like to do. Like, I don't think any of us running Blood Moon because even though it might be good in a deck, we're not really looking for it to play games that other people can't play. Except casting free spells. I don't feel bad about shutting off your deck built around casting free spells. I have zero at all qualms about playing Vexing Bauble and having like whatever having your Fierce Guardianship not work, or having your cascade into a cascade no longer work,
or your Atalis, all of the Atalis.
Oh yeah,
there are. I will laugh and laugh and laugh at shutting that kind of stuff off. I will never feel bad about that, and it feels a little bit fair because it shuts off everyone's free spell, so like you have to worry about playing around it yourself. It isn't just an effect where you get to have your cake and eat it too. You would have to sacrifice it to get it off the field if you wanted to do free stuff. But yeah, I think it's a really good card that keeps the board playing kind of fairly.
Yeah, I remember the last time that we had a Modern Horizons and everybody thought Void Mirror was just going to make it so that Eldrazi players can never exist. And like that didn't happen at all. But I really do think that this is a good twist and evolution of that. Just, okay, the person who's going to cheat, basically, they can't cheat anymore. Those are the only people that are going to be upset that this card exists. It's keeping everybody else in line. I am totally cool with it. I'm probably going to play it in a few decks. At the higher power level tables where people are wanting to play these types of puzzles and how they get out of the situation, it's going to be perfectly at home there too. So I think this is a good balance. It's a good evolution of Void Mirror type of effects. And it's not shutting down the fundamentals and making sure that people can't play their commander, for example, like Drannith Magistrate can. So it's keeping things in line without stopping people from playing the game altogether.
And the fact that you can just cash it in if you don't currently need it, or if you don't need it at all. And there are a lot of things that you can still get off of that, like a sacrifice and artifact trigger. Dana, I expect to see this in your deck that is recycling artifacts over and 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 over again.
It will be absolutely going into a Glyph of the Trader deck for sure.
Yeah, just a nice Soul Guide Lantern type of flexibility with it. There's a lot to like. And one card I'm surprised, Joey, that I'm pretty sure you do like, you just haven't had a chance to mention it, but I'll beat you to it. Accursed Marauder. That card is just great.
I had it pulled up to talk about next. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just Fleshbag Marauder, only it gets around people being able to sacrifice tokens, and it's a mana cheaper. That is wild.
Yeah, this card, it's very, very good. 2 mana, it's a zombie warrior still, but it's a 2/1 instead of the 3/1 Fleshbag. I mean, Fleshbag has already been a little bit power crept because we have Demon's Disciple and Plague Crafter, but those still, your opponents, if they have tokens, that's not going to hurt them very much. This one will, they have to sacrifice a non-token creature. It does say each player. Now, that's something pretty important to note. That,
oh no, you have to loop it instead of looping Fleshbag Marauder. Heaven forbid.
I know. Yeah, you're almost certainly sacrificing this to itself. I will say I have some pause about putting this into my Wilhelt zombie deck, just because in my Wilhelt deck, my goal there is to make a bunch of zombie tokens. I have the Reflections of Lityar and Necroduality, and I don't want to accidentally wind myself into a place where I have to sacrifice my own Wilhelt. But that is things still have to be going pretty well for me for that to be even a consideration that gives me the proper pause. So I really adore this. This is showing up. This is replacing in a couple of ways, cards like that. It's so funny that you had that pulled up because I was about to mention it. But, yeah. It good. That's very neat. This gets around what are the problems of sacrifice effects, and that's dangerous territory for them to be designing in, especially at a 2-mana common level.
But it's also one of those things where, you are probably replacing a similar effect with that. You're not at this point. The density of these things is such that, you're probably upgrading one of these effects to this one versus just adding another one to your decks. And I think that makes these a little bit safe. These kind of things a little bit safer to add new ones out there for.
Yeah, that's definitely wise. Well, you know what, Matt? Since you talked about a black card that I was going to mention, I might talk about a green card that I think you were probably eventually going to mention, and that's Collective Resistance. Which
good card.
I'm really over the moon for this one as well. 2 mana green instant with Escalate, so you have to pay this cost for each mode chosen beyond the first. So this can basically be either a 2 or 3 or 4 mana spell, because you can choose one or more to destroy an artifact, an enchantment, or to give one of your creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Yo, like any one of those modes is great for 2 mana. Like the most expensive one on those is probably like, 2 mana to save your creature when we already have like a Tameo safekeeping effect. But even then, if you can pay 3 mana and save your creature and also blow something up, or 4 mana and blow 2 things up and save your creature, yo, I like this card.
I think it also does a really good job at narrating how absolutely powerful and warping Heroic Intervention is, by the fact that like Heroic Intervention is 1 and a green and gives all your creatures, all your stuff, hexproof and indestructible. But this is just a mode for 1 creature on a card that has Escalate, and you can choose additional modes. That should point out a couple things to you. And yeah, being able to disenchant something out there or disenchant a couple things, that's also very, very powerful. I'm a little worried it might get into Crush Contraband levels where like sometimes you want to get 2 enchantments or 2 artifacts. You don't want to get exactly one of both. But it still is a very, very powerful card. There's a ton of flexibility around it. And I very, very much like this card.
Well, I mean, like, we can argue whether or not it should be in 37,000 decks, but Naturalize is in 37,000 decks. And this is a better Naturalize in every possible way.
Yeah, even if you're not saving a creature, you can pay 3 to hit 2 things. Like, for me, I think the conversation is really like, will you want a creature slot that can destroy things instead of a spell slot? But like, if your commander matters and you need to keep your commander safe, this is a great thing to help you protect what you need to protect while also really upsetting an opponent or two by getting rid of their stuff.
The protection suite in any given green deck has never been more competitive, and that's just not going to change anytime soon because we keep getting cards like this. And man, I'm not mad about it, but it's just it's making my brain spin with like when I'm trying to make these cuts.
Yeah.
There are genuinely a frighteningly high number of like step dodge cards like this, especially for green and for white, to be able to like, no, you were trying to board wipe or remove my commander with pinpoint or whatever. It's really easy for those colors to just dodge it. And that's something for us to all keep in mind.
And we already talked about another option with revitalizing repass too.
Yeah.
Like we're getting multiple options within the same set these days.
Yeah. Just so much. I mean, even those like little stuff that you wouldn't even like at first glance. You're like, oh, Gift of the Viper. It's a 1 mana instant. Put a +1 counter, a reach counter, and a death touch counter on target creature, and then tap it. Like, oh, that's a kill target attacking creature spell for 1 green mana, and the thing is now permanently better. It has a reach counter on it now and a death touch counter on it now. So, like, assuming it survives anyway. So, like, that's. Like, I'm not sure how many decks I have that want that, but it was one of those cards that I had to read, and I'm like, do I want that? Maybe that's really good. That's way better than you realize it is until when you look at it.
I guess that's kind of what has me so fascinated by Modern Horizons 3. Like, to be honest, when I was looking over a lot of the rares, which is kind of automatically where your eyes drift when you're looking over new cards in a set, there weren't as many things that like immediately jumped out at me as just like, oh, must have kind of cards. There were definitely some cards that dazzled. Like I mentioned the Warren Soul Trader, like, oh, that card's wild. That's a great rare. Like I'd certainly want that for plenty of decks. But compared to like Modern Horizons 2, there weren't quite as many rares that really just like wowed me on the page. And so I was a little bit at first kind of unsure where I fell with Modern Horizons 3. And then we started looking at the commons and uncommons, and I was like, oh, like this is especially where I feel the biggest shift, like a seismic shift, is going to happen in a whole lot of my decks. And it sounds like that's the way that you guys feel as well, with like how this is changing just the density of effects that we have access to and how good that density has now become.
Yeah, for me, if you want to summarize this whole setup, it's the fact that if anyone listening played back in Theros block, when Heroes Downfall was previewed, people went nuts for how good that card was as a black removal spell. Destroy target creature or planeswalker at instant speed. That was unprecedented. We just got basically a power crept version of that at common in Breathe Your Last. And nobody cared. Nobody cares at all.
It's the end of Hero's downfall, and I feel fine.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to say that like all of these are better than the rare. Not by any means. There are some standout rares, but like the real meat of this set feels like it's right here at this level. So like even though the prices of sets like Modern Horizons can be so intimidating, a lot of these cards will not be. They will not be that expensive to get, and I think they'll make some of the bigger impacts. And this is where I'm spending a lot of time, and it feels very, very rewarding to do so. Like I got new Aristocrat stuff, I got new removal spells that could also be lands, I got new stuff to save things. I feel like I shouldn't be allowed to, but everyone's going to get to enjoy them.
Well, and we spent an hour here talking about commons and uncommons from the set that we think are really, really good. And I guarantee there's 15 of them right now that we didn't talk about that like listeners are going, oh yeah, but and there's also this one that's really good in this deck of mine. And like the sheer amount of these playable cards in this set is mind-boggling.
If you don't put at least like a common or uncommon from Modern Horizons in probably every single deck, like I would argue you're not looking hard enough. There's just something for everyone at this level. All these cards are like a quarter or cheaper, and so it's just like there's so much power in this set. And again, like Joey said, we didn't talk about the rares and mythics, and those are nuts too. Right, yeah. Those are the most powerful things.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. And if there are cards that we didn't address, EDHREC also does a bunch of set review articles that you should definitely check out too. Usually divided by color and stuff like that. So give the front page of EDHREC a look if you want to see even more cards. But we had to talk about these because like it's so funny when sometimes the commons are the things that get you the most excited, and that's a fun space to live in for an hour. We just gushed about commons.
But also it's like we could tell you that the new Eldrazi Titans are powerful, and you're like, well, no, duh. Like that's not content. Like, I want to be helpful a little bit.
Oh man. Okay, this was great. Listeners, definitely you got to let us know about which of these cards are sticking out to you, which cards are going to show up the most in your decks. How do you feel about all of this new wave of the modal double-face land cards that we've received? We've got to hear about how this is affecting your decks. But that though, fellas, I think we're going to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to get in touch with us, where is it that they can find you online? Matt?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you need some of the best deck boxes out there to protect all your commons and uncommons, they are quite valuable. Yeah, totally. Check out Ultimate Guard for the best sleeves and deck boxes out there.
And Dana, how about you?
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC and Commander's Herald. And you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me online at Joseph M. Schultz, and you can also find the cast everywhere online at EDHRECast. And if you've got a question for us, you can contact us directly at edhrecast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.